CFB, coffee. How can you go wrong? Wake up! I'm Steve Rabinowitz.
I'm Jay Kaplan.
And I'm a very tired and very cranky Anthony Strait. It does not bode me well. I don't really wake up Saturday mornings before 10 a.m. So you be thankful. I like you guys very much because this is not a usual norm for me.
Not usual for any of us.
Millennial. This is our 2021 college football preview. We're coming to your city, kids. All right. We are in the midst of week one of the 2021 college football season. The fans are back. The pageantry is back. I'm going to need to look up that word later in the dictionary. We will preview the season and talk about the comings and goings of conference realignment. It never, ever, ever ends. But let's talk about the team that is the institution of football. One we talk about every year. No, not Bishop Sycamore. Those accomplishments speak truly for themselves. No, it's time to talk about Alabama yet again. Love them, hate them, do whatever you want with them. They are the defending national champs, have 47 of 63 first place votes in the preseason poll, and never, ever, ever stop reloading. It's sick, it's annoying, and yet it's amazing at the same time. So, since we haven't been on for a while, I still want to talk a little bit more. So I want to talk about Mac Jones leaving and going to go to the other place where Satan actually coaches, from Satan Jr. and Nick Saban to actual Satan and Bill Belichick. Enter Bryce Young. He actually has the most pressure on him this season because if you're the starting quarterback for the defending national champions, of course you have a lot of pressure. Expectation is really, really high, and he lost this job to Mac Jones last year. He could have easily been the starter, but he's got a lot of good things going for him. He is somebody who is very well recruited. He has as much talent probably as Mac Jones did last year. Mac gained a lot of experience going throughout the year, albeit it was only really an SEC year, but it's the best conference in the country. I don't think there's any question about that. So that's not really a problem. The one thing I'm very also not concerned about, actually, this is a huge plus, is when you're in Alabama, not only do you get pro receivers to throw to, and Jay will talk about that in a moment, you get pro coordinators to help you out. Having Bill O'Brien there as your offensive coordinator is great. I think that will help develop Bryce Young into what will, I think, end up being a stud and could easily be a very dark horse Heisman contender. And if I'm not mistaken, there are 3 Alabama starting quarterbacks right now in the NFL, which is sick. And all of them came in a row. Hurts, Tagovailoa, and now Mac Jones. And I wouldn't be surprised if Bryce Young is the next of them. We'll see what he does today versus Miami. It's a good first test. It's what Alabama usually does. I mean, Miami's still 14th in the country, but they'll schedule someone like that to kind of get their feet wet and get the ball rolling in their season. And then I think this will be a very good preview for what Alabama will be doing in the future, especially when I believe they play Georgia in 2 weeks. So, Anthony, let's talk about the most other, and actually, Jay, we'll go to you first.
All right.
Alabama also has to replace, the reigning Heisman winner Devontae Smith and Jalen Waddle. The skill position players are not as important as anybody else for Alabama. So how are they going to do that?
Well, we all know Devontae Smith had one of the most dominant seasons by a college football wide receiver in the history of the game. His 117 catches for 856 yards, that's a little under 16 yards a catch, and 23 TDs culminated in a Heisman Trophy. Jalen Waddle only had 28 catches for 591 yards, but that's still over 21 yards a catch and 4 scores. They both left Tuscaloosa as first-round picks in the NFL draft, and they took 2/3 of the Tide's receiving yards with them. So how do you replace that production? I'll tell you, Rabbi. Well, you start with junior wide receiver John Mechie, who was very productive last year. 55 catches for 916 yards. That's 16.7 a catch and 6 scores. His talent has never been in question. From his first preseason camp as a freshman, he's earned rave reviews from the people around the program. So much so that even during that freshman season, when Bama was absolutely loaded at the position, there was a feeling he would find his way onto the field. He did, and he continues to do so, even with all that other talent around him, because he's got plenty of it himself. Here's the thing, though. He's never been the man, wide receiver one, the guy defensive coordinators game plan for until now. How will he perform when all of the defensive attention is on him as opposed to Smith like it was last season? Can he get open when his team needs him to make the plays in the passing game that they're going to need him to make? Is he ready to be the leader of all of those other wide receivers who are looking to him to be that guy? Mechie says he's embracing the role and looking forward to it, having learned it from the players who came before him. We'll see how it shakes out. He's got a lot on his shoulders. And while he's expected to step in to replace Smith, Nick Saban went the transfer portal route for Waddle's potential replacement, bringing in Jamison Williams from Ohio State. The 6'2", 185-pound junior has plenty of speed, as evidenced by his 17.7 yards per catch average in 2 years at Columbus. Granted, it was only 15 catches, so it's a really small sample size. But we all know this, guys. Saban has always been a believer in speed kills. And apparently, this kid gave him enough of a glimpse to believe that he can do what Waddle did, take the top off a defense.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Add in redshirt junior Slade Bolton, who had 24 grabs for 270 yards, a little over 11 a catch and a score, operating out of the slot. And you've got three different and dynamic options on the perimeter for first-year quarterback Bryce Young to throw to. Saban also signed 4 of the top 10 wide receivers of the class of 2021. Uji Hall, Ja'Cory Brooks, JoJo Earl, and Christian Leary. On the surface, guys, this group may not have the same cachet as last year's, but there's a reason Bama is being called wide receiver U these days. Saban is a scary judge of talent, so it stands to reason that one of these guys is going to have a breakout season. One of them is going to have to if the tide's going to continue to roll.
Yeah, one thing I'm very interested in, we've mentioned with the reloading of Alabama, their recruiting has been top-notch, especially in the offensive side for the last half a decade.
Yep.
Now they're working the transfer portal correctly. Oh, good God. This team, Nick Saban might be able to do this until he's like 90 with no
Evil Empire.
Well, we'll see what happens. Anthony, you have to win with 2 sides of the ball. At least that's what they've told us throughout the years, although we don't know really anymore. Anthony, that Alabama defense was the Achilles heel last year to this team, but the offense did enough to cover it up, and Alabama's defense was okay, enough to win a national title. Is this defense better than it was then?
Well, here's the thing. Statistically, Alabama was good last season. I mean, they led the SEC in points allowed per game at just 19 a game, and 32nd overall in the country. But you have to factor in that many teams didn't play more than 6 games. There was COVID. There was cancellations. There were obviously postponements. You had teams that, last season was just a mess. So you have to kind of take that into consideration. However, this is also an Alabama defense last year in 2020 that gave up 400 or more yards a game 4 times. That's kind of the old bend but don't break mentality. And we saw them get literally lit up by, Lane Kiffin's offense is pretty good at Ole Miss, but when you get lit up by a Lane Kiffin-led offense, and the SEC championship game wasn't exactly a gimme either. That turned into a shootout not many people was expecting. Alabama's defense was good enough to not lose a game. They went undefeated in spite of itself. But, it was also overshadowed by what was probably one of the greatest offensive units we've seen in recent college football history. Yeah. Now, going into this year, it should be a heck of a lot better. Obviously, this would be the most experienced defensive unit that Nick Saban has had in over almost a decade and a half. Just go back to maybe 2007 to see a defensive unit that has been together for more than a couple of years. And in this case, they should be the strength is going to be the front 7 up front without question. You think about the pass rushers and the linebackers being able to cover in the passing game. Christopher Allen and Will Anderson Jr. is kind of leading that group of 7 up right there as far as being able to stop the run and being able to get into the pass. But also you have Malachi Moore, who is the safety is going to be more the signal caller and a defensive backfield. They only lost one starter, and we know that's Patrick Sultan Jr., who's now in the NFL. So this unit overall should be a heck of a lot better. They should be able to get to the pass rush a lot better. Derek King, right out of the gate, is going to be a great test because of his mobility and his arm strength when they play Miami, obviously, later this afternoon. So we get to see right out of the gate just how good and just how much of a step Pete Golden's defense have made in the last several months, because it was last year was a bit of a mixed bag. Statistically, they look good, but in the eye candy test, they were pretty average. I mean, let's be honest. Alabama went undefeated because of their offense. It wasn't because the defense was so dominant. They just made enough plays to not lose a game. This year, however, they have the capabilities to go out and win a game if, for whatever reason, Alabama's offense struggles. So, like I said, Alabama on both sides of the football look really good. And it's no wonder that they're the overall number one team ranked in the country. And Jay made a bit of emphasis to it. They're the evil empire. It's like when you think they're going to get weakened by losing guys to the NFL, they actually get stronger.
Yeah.
So let's see what happens.
I'm actually fascinated. I'm fascinated yet terrified about how this team just kind of reloads and how Nick Saban finally took a more offensive mentality towards this team. First of all, I made a mistake. They're not playing Georgia, but they are playing Florida in 2 weeks at Florida. So let's see what happens with that. They have A&M in the schedule in October. They have LSU. They always have the dangerous SEC championship game. Couple of big games in there. There are some layups, as Alabama schedules usually do have. This team is going to be a circus show. They're always the ticket of college football, and with very good reason. Mm-hmm. So I'm very curious to see what happens, because you do see that clunker of an Alabama game every now and then. That Ole Miss game was definitely probably the one it should have been last year, but you're not going to see. This team is making the college football playoff. I have no doubt about that.
The Motley Crew at this point. I mean, wherever they go, they're going to have the huge following and all the attention. Alabama is always going to be must-see TV. We have two big games this afternoon, and it's kind of a 1A, 1B as far as the importance of both games. I mean, let's be honest.
We'll talk about that in a second.
We'll talk about that in the next
We'll talk about that in a second, but not really. All right. Now the contenders to the invisible throne of the Crimson Tide. Spoiler alert, thrones don't exist. They're metaphorical. That's your mansplaining tip of the week, sponsored by Stephen Rabinowitz.
Spoken by somebody who didn't watch Game of Thrones, dude?
No, but still, it's still metaphorical in this case. The teams ranked 2, 3, and 4 are pretty strong and are all teams who have received preseason first place votes, and they've received them for a reason. Mm-hmm. First up, the traitors of the Big 12. Let's talk about Oklahoma moving in that number 2 position. They were 9-2 last year and could have stumbled a lot out of the gate, but ended up winning a Big 12 championship because they apparently do that in their sleep. Mm-hmm. Not like the Oklahoma offense wasn't fun last season. Number 1 in the Big 12, averaging close to 500 yards and 43 points per game, and they don't really lose too much. There were some talent losses, but let's talk about what they have still, and it's pretty much a team that is about as loaded as any Oklahoma team has been for a while. You have Spencer Rattler. He is entering the 3rd season in the Lincoln Riley system, and we know Lincoln Riley has provided even more offensive mind than Bob Stoops did in his time in Oklahoma. 28 touchdowns last year, 7 picks, and he doesn't really add too much to the ground game, but he is Tim Tebow. When you get to 1st and goal, he is always going to be a weapon that can easily score 15 to 20 touchdowns just with his legs. Then there's so many receivers and tight ends of Oklahoma that are in the transfer portal, but they have Marvin Williams, Theo Weiss, Jaden Hazelwood, Drake Stoops, and a guy who can catch the ball out of the backfield in Austin Stogner, who also plays tight end. It's the best and deepest receiving corps in the nation, bar none. They have a good offensive line. They play in a conference where they're really only going to be challenged by Iowa State and Texas. Oklahoma if Lincoln Riley is to win a title, this is the year. I think in their remainder of time in the Big 12, whether it be 2 years, whether it be 3 years, whether it be 4 years, whether it be 1 year, they need to take advantage of what is a weaker conference and take advantage of an offense that frankly matches up with everybody in the Big 12 pretty easily. Oklahoma guys can dominate.
Can they dominate? Can they dominate? Is that what you're saying, Rabbi?
Oh, and we'll have one more dominate too. I continue on. Jay, you get to be the first lucky contestant and pronounce the Clemson quarterback's name for 2021 on this show.
Been working on it. All
right, good luck. Good luck to you, sir. Trevor Lawrence is gone. Clemson is still number 3. What are their prospects for 2021?
Everybody, lays is like, ooh, Trevor Lawrence is gone. Clemson is going to come back to earth. Dabo Swinney still has the bulk of a squad that, once again made the CFP semis last year. So I don't expect too much of a drop off. I mean, their first test out of the gate will be a big one, and we'll get to that in a minute. But I mean, granted, as good as Clemson may be at all the other positions on both sides of the ball, and having one of the best coaches in the nation in Dabo Swinney, everything everybody's going to be looking at, especially starting, with in the first game of the season, is, Lawrence's replacement. And how, I don't know that you can truly replace one of the best to ever play the position, but DJ Uiagalelei, been practicing, Rabbi.
Yeah, you got it wrong now.
Really? Say it for me then.
Uiagalelei.
All right. I've been stretching it a little bit. All right. We may just refer to him as DJ going forward. We'll see how
you can do that if you want.
We'll be given every chance to do so. He started in place of Lawrence against Boston College when Lawrence tested positive for COVID-19, and again the following week against Notre Dame. He took a game plan that was designed for Lawrence, and he kept top-ranked Clemson undefeated with a come-from-behind win over BC. A week later, tossed 439 yards in a double overtime loss to Notre Dame on the Irish's field, setting a record for most passing yards by an opposing quarterback in Irish history. Lawrence is now in the NFL with Jacksonville, so DJ is the unquestioned QB1, and he makes his debut in that position in the most important game on Clemson's schedule as they take on the number 5 ranked Georgia Bulldogs. It's the first top 5 season opener in each school's history. It's possible it will be a preview of the college football playoff. No pressure, right? So if anyone's capable of handling it, it's DJ. He definitely has the skill set to be a starting quarterback at one of the top programs in the country. Most major programs wanted him after his sophomore year when he completed 184 of 270 that's about 68% completion, a little over 2,900 yards and 31 TDs against only 2 picks. His junior year, he led his high school team to a 13-1 record, completing 179 of 257 throws, 69.6% completion percentage, 3,336 yards, 48 touchdowns against 7 picks. USA Today named him their National Offensive Player of the Year and a first-team All-American. Hell of a resume for a guy replacing a legend. One of the main reasons DJ chose Clemson over LSU or Oregon was the opportunity to study under Lawrence. With those 2 starts last season, he finished his freshman year 78 of 117 at 66.27% of his passes completed, 914 yards, 5 scores. It's a small sample size, but Clemson head coach Dabo Swinney has nothing but confidence in his sophomore quarterback. When he went looking for DJ to tell him that Lawrence was out for that BC game due to COVID, he found the freshman in the QB room eating lunch and watching BC game film. He didn't yet know he was going to start, but he's preparing as if he was, and that told Swinney all he needed to know about Lawrence's future replacement. The laid-back kid from California doesn't feel pressure, at least when it comes to football, even though he's replacing the winningest quarterback in Clemson history. And here's DJ's quote on playing with pressure. Playing football, for me, it's no pressure. This is just fun, something I love to do. It's the perfect attitude when your first start as the number 1 quarterback is against the number 5 team in the nation from the best conference in the nation. Good luck tonight, son.
Spoiler alert. We'll talk about that in a second. I think it's kind of funny how Clemson went from, remember, there's basically, you had Deshaun Watson for 2 years, got to a national title game and won. So that's 1 title, 1 runner-up. Had the 1 year of a transition in between, still got to the college football playoff and was number 1 most of the season. And then in the 3 years of Lawrence, national title, national runner-up, and another college football playoff appearance. This is why Clemson has built the reputation that it is now, and DJ will hopefully continue that tradition for Clemson because they're as much of an institution as anybody right now because of that.
I mean, Rabbi, I mean, and they you look at everybody, says Alabama is the SEC. In terms of college football, Clemson is the ACC. Everybody else is assumed to be playing for second, and considering the way North Carolina stubbed its toe last night, that may continue to be true.
And that might be a problem for Clemson, which we'll talk about in just a second. Anthony, number 4, Ohio State. We would have assigned this to Jay, but he said he'd rather not. We went through the extensive negotiations, and it ended up going to you. Anthony,
you don't make a Michigan fan do the season preview of the Ohio State guys. Okay, you know what I'm saying?
Thank you. Thank you for being objective, Jay. Anthony, what do we think about
Who's objective about college football? We're all homers in some shape, manner, or form.
Okay, Anthony, what do we think?
That's not true. You know that? My school don't have a football team anymore, so I can get away with this.
So that's why you're talking about the Ohio State Buckeyes.
All right,
thank you for interrupting me and just saying it. So let's just go. Anthony, Ohio State University. What do you think?
Well, the Ohio State actually played a few nights ago and had a challenge against a very game Minnesota Golden Gophers. By the way, the atmosphere in these last few days, seeing college football back, it's been pretty impressive. And I'll get to Virginia Tech later on when I talk about my Heisman pick. But CJ Stroud, I mean, tough shoes to follow when you have to replace Justin Fields, of all people, who is in the NFL, who is going to be the heir apparent of the Chicago Bears, but also took this team to a national championship game appearance last season. So very big shoes to fill if you're 19 years old. Look, he got out to a rough start in the first half. I mean, it was pretty obvious. Just 6-14, 53 yards, threw an interception. Minnesota's defense really was able to get out after him in the first half. But what Justin Fields leave behind is an embarrassment of rushes as far as offensive weapons with Ohio State. And they have a lot of big play capability. Literally, they won Thursday night in Minnesota because of the big play. We got the wide receiving core. Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson combined for 9 catches, 197 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Then you look at the fact that they have Jackson Smith Nujuba, I probably butchered that name. I haven't had enough time to practice it just yet. Julian Fleming and Emeka Ubuka as part of wide receivers as well. They have a tight end, Jeremy Rucker, also. But what's going to be key to this running back, this offense is the 3-headed monster in the backfield. And we saw that on this play Thursday night. Mayan Williams led the way with 125 yards on the ground. Massachusetts III added in 29. Trevon Henderson took a screen pass for a 70-yard touchdown. That kind of gave Ohio State some distance in that ball game, despite everything Minnesota tried to do. The key is going to be the defense. I mean, they have a very young, inexperienced defense that last season had a hard time stopping the run and also had a hard time stopping the read option on Thursday night against the Golden Gophers. Yeah, surrendered 408 yards to give up 31 points. And it's going to take some time for this young defense to kind of grow and gel. But Michigan State looked good last night. We don't know what to see out of Minnesota. I'm just talking about as far as the Big Ten East. As far as competition, so it's going to be a matter. The key to the success is kind of staying at number 4, at least staying when striking distance of the college football playoff. It's going to be on the defense. Can this defense be good enough to kind of not give up so many big plays like they did on Thursday night, or at least be able to slow down the run game, which they were not able to do last season? We saw how Alabama could have just picked a score in that national championship game as far as this defense was concerned. I saw Rabbi's reaction. That was all our reaction, pretty much.
One thing that you forgot to mention is the fact that Mo Ibrahim of Minnesota, if he didn't get injured in that third quarter, probably could have run for about 275 yards. in that game.
Yeah, by the way, I did forget to mention that, and that was key actually because
that was the reason. One of the reasons why they won.
You feel like the Golden Gophers' momentum just kind of shifted.
Yeah.
The moment that injury took place because he could not be stopped. I mean, Minnesota's offense was just able to get anything on the ground. They were able to kind of use that in the play action to kind of get plays downfield. This Ohio State defense is going to have to really adjust really fast because the offense have a lot of firepower to kind of win games and even keep them in games in case of a shootout. But again, if they can't stop anybody, it's going to be really hard for Ohio State to come out of the Big Ten.
Two things before we move on. One, that Big Ten is kind of deep, not necessarily in teams that match up for like college football playoffs, but Indiana and Iowa, who both are playing today, Penn State and Wisconsin, who are both playing today, will be able to give Ohio State fits. And I will even throw in Michigan in the midst because they're a little more under the radar than normal. And I think that might be the way Jim Harbaugh actually likes it, shockingly enough, because of the time he's had in Michigan. So if they can Michigan, even if they're like a 7-5 team, which I think most people expect them to be, unfortunately, they could still give Ohio State some fits in their game at the end of the year. Now, moving on to a lot of top 25 matchups are coming today. We mentioned most of them. We mentioned Alabama, Miami, which will take place in Dallas, Indiana, Iowa. That's a top 25 matchup. Look out for the Hoosiers, by the way. Penn State, Wisconsin. That's a top 25 matchup. And Louisiana Lafayette versus Texas is a top 25 matchup.
Really?
Louisiana is 23 and Texas is 21. So we have a ton of appetizers, but the main course of this week's menu is being served up in Charlotte, North Carolina, with number 3 Clemson and number 5 Georgia. For me, it's the biggest week 1 matchup in years. I've got questions. You've got answers. Anthony, can DJ Uiagalelei do the job in a big situation right off the bat? I know Jay kind of touched up on it before, kind of add the icing to the cake of this one.
Well, it's actually DJ Uiagalelei because I had to practice it several times this morning. And he gave me the parentheses. He gave me the pronunciation.
So the law is actually la.
It's la.
Not lay.
Uiagalelei. All right.
Uiagalelei.
Oh wait, well, we're going to call him DJ for the rest of the show.
Call him DJ. You two can call him DJ. I'm going to try to go
doing such a disservice to his name, and I feel so bad for that. But look, I mean, you want to talk about and Jay mentioned his laid back persona. He didn't get his driver's license until a few months ago. Yep. He's 20 years old. Wow. I mean, he's a very, very laid back personality, which is actually some of a trait he shows from Trevor Lawrence. On top of the fact that he had that his pregame preparation and as far as game plan and film study is right along with Trevor Lawrence too. So there isn't much of a drop off as far as the two quarterbacks. Not to mention because of DJ's size and his arm strength, he's gotten a lot of comparisons to Ben Roethlisberger, which is pretty impressive when you consider that. But going into this game. One weapon he's going to have back is Justin Ross. Last year, he missed most of the year because of a neck injury. That gives a deep threat in the outside as far as the offense. You also look at you have to get some contributions from some of these other guys. Frank Lasson Jr., EJ Williams, Oju is another guy that they probably have to get some contributions from. And also you got to look up front. The battle in the trenches. Georgia is a young, inexperienced defense, only returning 4 starters, but they can still go after the quarterback. And they allowed just under 3 yards a game on the ground last year. So it's gonna come down to which of these young quarterbacks, and obviously Georgia will be talked about in a minute, can minimize the mistakes, and that's going to really determine who comes out of this ball game.
Okay, so let's move on to Georgia, and let me see if I can pronounce this quarterback name correctly. It's JT Daniels. A lot better for you, Jay. Jay, you know a lot about JT Daniels at this time at USC. Is he the answer for the Bulldogs in this game?
Well, like as you led off with that, I am very familiar with Daniels from his time at USC. He was one of the nation's top recruits, number 1 actually on some lists. when he signed with Southern Cal ahead of the 2018 season. He very quickly in spring ball, fall ball, locked down the #1 quarterback job and became just the second true freshman to start a quarterback for the Trojans in his first game. If not for a knee injury, he had an up and down freshman season, but so did the Trojans. They only went 5-7. But if not for a knee injury in the opening game of his second season as a starting quarterback, we wouldn't even know the name Keaton Slovis, and Mr. Daniels wouldn't have traded USC Cardinal.
Don't you think, by the way, it was the best of both worlds in this situation? No, that's what the transfer portal does.
Yeah, exactly. So Daniels is coming off a 2020 season where he only played 4 games, but he averaged over 300 yards passing in those 4 games, all of them wins, completing 67.2% of his passes with 10 TDs against just 2 picks. Finished the season going 26 of 38 for 392 yards, 1 score, 1 pick in the 24-21 Peach Bowl win over 6th-ranked Cincinnati. He showed everyone that he can beat teams with his arm, and if you sell out to prevent him from connecting on big plays with his receivers, Georgia's running backs, who may be the best in the country, led by Zamir White and James Cook, will beat you on the ground. Now, this iteration of the Clemson defensive front four that he's going up against tonight is deep, but it's not yet as fearsome as a pass rushing group as in years past, which does bode well for Georgia's offensive tackles, Jamari Saylor and Warren McClendon, in terms of giving Daniels time to throw to the likes of sophomore Jermaine Burton, junior Kyrus Jackson, and sophomore Marcus Rosemy-Jackson. That's a hell of a last name for a hyphenate.
I think we've had a lot of names.
Yeah.
I think we need to start doing some more discussion between all of this.
The other interesting thing to keep an eye on is whether Daniels and Arian Smith will be able to connect on some deep balls against a Clemson secondary that has some question marks and has historically struggled against big arm quarterbacks. Clemson, Georgia offensive coordinator Todd Monken is very high on his starting quarterback. With a full spring and fall behind him, Monken likes what he's seeing from Daniels in terms of Daniels understanding the offense and the two of them being on the same page. Georgia is the preseason favorite to win the SEC East, and a lot of that will hinge on the play of the USC transfer under center. Daniels came to USC with a lot of hype, guys. If he can be the quarterback he was expected to be coming out of California powerhouse Mater Dei High School, where he threw for, get this, 12,000 yards with 152 touchdowns against just 14 interceptions. Let that sit for a second there. Then he'll be the quarterback the Bulldogs need to potentially challenge Alabama in the SEC. Georgia is 9-9-1 when it faces a ranked opponent to start the season. So going against number 3 Clemson will be a hell of a way for Daniels to start the season. But this is the type of game, guys, where if you're a guy who has designs on being a franchise type, Heisman type quarterback, this is where you can show people what you're made of.
So if you're a South Carolina fan, who do you root for in this game? Do you root for Bank of America Stadium to just implode? Because I think that might be the answer to that question.
Well, hey, considering the fact that rivalry is
South Carolina Clemson is even worse of a rivalry than South Carolina Georgia. I may think that they may be rooting for Georgia in that game.
I tell you, I don't know how they would expect to root, because you never want Clemson to win. I mean, people who go to South Carolina root for 2 teams, the Gamecocks and whoever's playing Clemson. But at the same time, it's Alabama. It's your own conference. I mean, Georgia, rather, your own conference. You don't want your own conference guys to do better. So, I mean, I think it's
a good question. All right. Stakes in this game very quickly. Clemson's, both are interesting, and I'm going to kind of tie the North Carolina loss from last night. Clemson's not going to get a lot of chances to get big victories this year, because they're going to play. I think they will play North Carolina sometime down the line this year. But outside of that, it's going to be tough to get signature victories on the schedule. Luckily for them, the brand, and this is what I hate about college football as a whole, the brand of Clemson is going to be enough where they can afford a loss here, sweep the ACC, which is probably one of the most overrated conferences ever, because I think it hasn't had a lot of bite over the last few years. Yeah, they play North Carolina. They actually don't play North Carolina down the line. So their schedule is cupcake after cupcake. There is Florida State might be a challenge if Mike Norvell gets that program together. So there's nothing on the board really for Clemson that's worth time. So they might, I think they'll get the edge of the CFP committee, but to get what we would call in the business as street cred going into the college football playoff time, they need a win here. Or they might be struggling and they might have answers coming to them and a lot of pressure once we get to the end of the season, where maybe a one-loss SEC team might be like Texas A&M might be favored more than them. But we'll see. For Georgia, it's a little bit of a different story. Of course, they could afford a loss here if they run the table. It's almost impossible to run the table because that's going to probably mean a win over Alabama in the SEC championship. They're going to have to beat Florida down the line in late October in that classic rivalry. But very more important, and Jay also just mentioned it, Georgia is known right now as a bunch of chokers. I'm going to say it straight up. Since that Alabama, they had that kind of going into that after that Alabama game in the national championship in 2018. Same story might persist here. Their schedule is not hard, but again, Florida, a possible SEC championship matchup, and at a game at Auburn in early October, which seems weird because they don't usually play that early. They usually play later in the season. Both teams need it for credibility. Can they afford a loss and get to the college football playoff? Sure. I don't think we're going to have 3 undefeated teams in a full season get to the finish line undefeated. But this is going to be very interesting to see what happens for the loser of this game, because we haven't seen a big game like this to start the college football playoff era in a while. So stakes are high, but stakes may not be as high as you think for the college football playoff. That makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, email me or Facebook message me and I'll explain that again in 10 words or less. All right. Unfortunately, we would love to talk about on the field stuff over here, but it's college football. Name and license is now on the table, so we really know that college football is a business. This offseason, Texas and Oklahoma, 2 of the premier colleges in America, agreed to go from the Big 12 to the SEC. It's starting in 2025, but I can bet dollars to donuts it will not be that. It will not be that long. It's probably the most important move we'll get conference-wise this decade, probably until like another 30 teams want to join the SEC and it becomes like a velvet, it becomes a door where there's a bouncer in front and they try to check your credentials. So don't quote me on that. There's so long time this decade, but the SEC has gotten that chef's kiss on top of their conference. And I know we're talking about this more in terms of Texas being a decent football team who will probably get better. And Oklahoma, obviously, they are the number 2 ranked team in the country this year going into the preseason. And again, they end up in the top 10 regularly. But I always say this, and I go back to when Rutgers joined the Big 10. You want to expand your brand. And for the SEC, bringing your brand that Midwest to Texas and Oklahoma is so crucial for many reasons. One, more Midwest advertising, and you really get the ball rolling on basically taking over the state of Texas, which I think they've already done a little bit with Texas A&M. Plus you get that Texas A&M rivalry back in some way, shape, or form, and I think they would love to do that. But most importantly, you're bringing the Texas and Oklahoma names to your conference is just as big as the teams and just as big as the location. The SEC doing this has pretty much locked up the best conference in football for however long they want it. And they are going to be huge proponents. And one thing that we'll be looking at going forward, and I'll mention this in our next segment, is the expansion of that college football playoff. Once that college football playoff gets to 8 teams, or it could even get to 12, the SEC, dollars to donuts in an 8-team playoff will probably have 3 or 4 teams in. In a 12-team playoff, they may have as much as 6 teams in. And seeing that postseason money or seeing that postseason notoriety go to the SEC could make the SEC go from the Death Star to a much, much bigger Death Star. Yeah, that's right. I don't know my Star Wars references, so I'm just expanding my Death Star. The brand of the SEC is really, 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 really strong now. Just imagine what it's about to be with this move. Anthony, let's talk about the Big 12. They did get a little bit of help along the way this week, and we'll talk about that in a second. But can they survive the next 5 to 10 years after this move?
Well, let's talk about what they're losing in Texas and Oklahoma. And it's the name, the brand, Texas and Oklahoma. One of the big rivalries, the Red River Showdown is something that, you look forward to. It's that 11 a.m., 12 noon local start time. The rivalry and the names, because you got to think about this. Texas and Oklahoma are big time colleges that, that lock up kind of the Midwest and obviously the state of Texas. But also those are two names that when they're really good, they're always in the college football playoff conversation. So to lose probably two of your biggest names in your conference is a big blow. And especially because they're going to an already very dominant conference, and this is making them even bigger, almost like a super conference, pretty much. That's pretty much what they're turning into. And before this week, one of the things I was going to talk about is the idea that maybe in 5 years that the Big 12 would disband, and you would see the other Power 5 conferences kind of cherry pick which teams they wanted to invite. However, I had to rip my notes up in the last 72 hours because it was reported that the Big 12 is going to extend invitations this week to 4 teams to kind of go back to the 12 teams that they have been previously, which is BYU, Cincinnati, Houston, and University of Central Florida, UCF. Now, why this is so important, obviously, the Big 12 feel like to replace 2 big name schools, we can add 4, kind of make up for the loss. But also, you think about this, as far as TV, you get the television markets of Orlando, Florida, and also Houston, Texas, which is obviously a big TV market in the Texas area, which obviously obviously because we talk about the NBA, it shares TV markets. San Antonio and Dallas. So a chunk of that helps as far as recruiting also. You got to think about that. And that outreach, as far as these markets, BYU, you need to go out to Utah, Salt Lake City. So that brings some added exposure. Obviously, BYU being an independent is one thing, but to be able to bring them into your conference would be a big boost in itself. But also, it's in the level of competition as well. You feel like when you're losing 2 of the bigger names, the level of competition kind of fall off. Now you add 4, you go back to 12 teams. It's a little better, and it brings the competition level up. And you think about, and also going back to UCF, the state of Florida, and I looked this up, have 16 of the top 100 prospects for the class of 2022. So if you're in recruiting and you bring them, and Central Florida is going to be part of the Big 12 conference and they're set, that is a huge boost. And also you got, and 3 of those 4 teams are legitimately college football playoff teams when they're at their best. So it's a good with the bad with the Big 12. It's just going to be a matter of seeing how it plays out when obviously this year and the next couple of years of how big of a loss Texas and Oklahoma is going to be, how much of a gain these other 4 teams were going to be. It's just overall in the big picture.
Before we get to Jay, what I've actually read about this is kind of curious. BYU can join as soon as next season because BYU and Big 12 have that mutual ESPN contract. So that could easily happen. AAC, you have to give 27 months notice for Cincy, UCF, and Houston. So they can join within maybe like 2 years. So you could really have a mega Big 12 for a time being. I don't think that's going to really change Texas and Oklahoma's mind anything, but it'll be very interesting to see. Plus, UCF can finally get that national championship, some conference affiliation that they technically won in 2018.
And strength of schedule also helped them. And the strength of schedule argument goes out the window because obviously they're in a major Power 5 conference. So I know that kind of held UCF back. Won't be a factor if they join the Big 12 this time around.
I'm very also curious to see what the Big 12 will be looked at as a conference when we get into it. Will it be a Power 5 or a Power 4? Dun, dun, dun. That's next segment. Jay.
Yeah.
I'm going to say this in a very generic way twice, but college football will never be the same, will it?
No, I mean, I have been railing against expansion in college sports for years because it's been done in the pursuit of not just dollars as a whole, but college football dollars as a whole. You look at what happened to the Big East. It basically ruined what was one of the premier basketball conferences in the nation because they went in search of, they had schools that went in search of football dollars. You've seen it every time something like this happens. We saw it when the SEC, first made their inroads. This expansion, as you guys said, which adds two of the premier brands in college football, and saying brands is something that irks me actually using that word in terms of college football, Rabbi, but it is a thing and we have to accept it.
It's understandable, unfortunately.
It is, sadly. To me, this furthers the haves versus have-nots divide that some, including me, have been seeing in this sport for a few years now, as I preface, starting with the SEC when they planted their flag in the state of Texas, taking A&M, which happily came on board just to be able to thumb their noses at the team that wears burnt orange in Austin, that they were the only Texas team in the SEC. Not sure they're crazy about having to deal with those guys again. And then the SEC poached Missouri, which gave them a foothold in the Midwest. This whole thing, as you guys have talked about, puts the future of the Big 12, one of the stalwart college football conferences in history of the game, in doubt. Before, there was a question on the table, like, could they possibly survive as an 8-team entity? I mean, they did once way back when. Would they get sucked up by another conference, or will the remaining schools be attractive enough, that teams from the group 5 conferences would want to join? Now, and, as Anthony said, we heard from, it's been reported on multiple outlets from multiple sources that the plan is to invite BYU, UCF, Cincinnati, and Houston. And as you guys said, these 4 schools are, what they're planning to do is these 4 schools are planning to individually submit formal applications to the Big 12 early next week for entry into the conference. And once the Big 12 receives those applications, the conference's board of directors is expected to meet and extend formal invitations to each of the schools. All 4 are expected to accept those invitations, according to the sources that we are hearing from. Sports Illustrated was the first to report this, and The Athletic has followed up on it. As Anthony talked about, BYU would be a huge get for the conference with their status, with their legacy. The other schools bring their own cachet, even if there are those who believe, and here's the quote, bringing in a Cincinnati and UCF doesn't bring any eyeballs. It would still, I think, revitalize the Big 12, but it would, again, negatively impact group of 5 conferences, furthering the haves versus have-not conversation. And it's also looking at the other 3 automatic qualifier conferences of the Power 5, as we've come to know them, the ACC, the Big 12, and the Pac12, to make the knee-jerk reaction response that we saw in the aftermath of that. And we're going to talk about that in our next segment. Spoiler alert. I think it's going to have other teams in the group of 5 conferences looking to move into better situations in terms of conference affiliation, which will, again, further erode the sport across all of the conferences and across the nation. I mean, we're looking more and more, guys, that, we're headed towards a super conference type of model. And in my opinion, that is not a good scenario for college football as a whole. It negatively impacts competition. And don't get me started on how all of these other schools will ultimately get screwed when it comes to TV dollars down the road, because we all know the SEC eats first, and the larger it goes, the more big name teams it brings in, the more you got the ESPNs and the Foxes and the CBSs of the world salivating, to get more SEC games on their own schedule, because that's the biggest draw. Look, guys, I hope that the Big 12 manages to remain a viable football conference, but raiding other conferences to offset another round of expansion by the evil empire that is the SEC, I don't think that, changes like this are good as a whole for the sport of college football, which has become more obsessed obsessed with what's good for their wallets than what's good for the game.
Agreed. I have no comments on that, but I think the one thing that we could talk about in upcoming weeks is college football is such an institution now, and we talk about it from September. We talk about the college basketball season is actually longer because it's November to March, so it expands about 5 months. College football really only has 4 months, and you can really only make it 3 for some teams because most bowl games don't matter. If we cared more about college basketball to the point that we do when we do in March, maybe this wouldn't happen. But unfortunately, that's why college football is where it is now. And as much as it sucks to say, that's why all of these moves are made, and let the chips fall where they may with the rest of the moves.
I mean, Rabbi, you think about it. I mean, the underlying thing and the thing that nobody's talking about, because as you put it, college football gets talked about the most, except basically during March. But but it's at the forefront now, and what's not really being talked about is the impact this move is going to have on one of the best basketball conferences in the nation. You have a storied program like Kansas, which is one of the bluest of the blue blood programs. Baylor is the defending national champion.
Yep.
Oklahoma, Texas had good teams. This is one of the best college basketball conferences in the nation, and it's going to get hit hard by those two schools leaving. But I will say this: BYU doesn't bring much as a basketball conference, as a basketball team, and neither does UCF. But I tell you what, though, if I'm the guys on the college basketball side, adding Houston and Cincinnati, not bad replacements on the hardwood side of the equation.
And Cincy is a top 10 ranked team now, so it's going to help out a lot. All right, moving on. I feel like the next words that I'm about to say should be put on a comic strip, so I'm going to read in a comic voice. Meanwhile, in the caverns of the ACC, Big 10, and Pac12, an alliance was formed between the 3 jilted conferences. Anyway, officially announced a week ago, we asked questions about the most secret alliance since an episode of Survivor. Jay, what the heck is this?
Little super friend.
Yeah,
I'm kidding.
I would say glad you asked, but I know you're not glad you asked. But I'll lay it all out for you guys anyway. So this is takes a bit, so hang tight. As you said, Rabbi, on August 24th, the ACC, Big 10, and Pac-12 announced that they intended to work together on a variety of issues, from college football playoff expansion to NCAA governance, and will form a non-conference football scheduling alliance as soon as their respective contracts permit them to do so. The 3 leagues also intend to incorporate cross-country scheduling arrangements in men's and women's basketball. They are taking a stand on the opposite side of the fence they believe the SEC to be on. So I read that this is the press release voice. So here we go. First things first, guys. There's no signed contract here between these 3 leagues. This is a gentleman's agreement between Pac-12 Commissioner George Kliavkoff, ACC Commissioner Jim Phillips, and Big 10 Commissioner Kevin Warren, plus 41 presidents and chancellors and 41 athletic directors. That's the number of schools involved. The first line of the announcement of this endeavor stated it will bring 41 world-class institutions together on a collaborative approach surrounding the future evolution of college athletics and scheduling. As you can see, the platitudes were plentiful. Warren had this quote: "Hopefully this will bring some much-needed stability in college athletics." And also, he wouldn't say that this is a reaction to Oklahoma and Texas joining the SEC. Are you kidding me? Really? He chose to ignore the fact that a handshake deal doesn't typically engender long-term stability. Phillips answered a question about how the shared values of the alliance differ from that of the SEC with this quote: "Education, research, and service." Ooh, the SEC is really being burned by that. Is there hope that this will result in more out-of-conference football games between the teams in 3 conferences? Possibly, but in order for that to even happen, guys, the Pac-12 would have to reduce its conference schedule from 9 games to 8, and the Pac-12 would need ESPN and Fox to agree to amend their current deal with the league, which runs through 2024. The ACC is locked into a long-term deal with ESPN. The Big 10 and Pac-12 have negotiations coming up soon. Add to this equation that the ACC essentially also plays 9 conference games with the involvement of Notre Dame, and you're down now to 3 potential open dates per season. This gets further reduced by existing SEC in-state rivalry games like FSU Florida, Clemson South Carolina, which we mentioned, and Georgia Tech. And making matters worse, the Alliance commissioners are saying future game contracts will be honored. Oh, okay. Here's what that means. Ohio State's home and home with SEC schools, Texas, Alabama, and Georgia will remain. Pac-12 and ACC schools like Utah, Cal, Arizona State, Colorado, Miami, and NC State, they're all on Florida's schedule between 2022 and 2031, and those games will also remain in place. And speaking of the Fighting Irish, they're contractually obligated to play 5 ACC opponents each year, and they also have annual dates with USC and Stanford in addition to their Big Ten opponents. Notre Dame is technically included in the 41 schools the Alliance represents, as the Irish are full members of the ACC in basketball and other Olympic sports. It would make sense to count those matchups as part of the scheduling alliance. But, this is a handshake agreement, so none of this is locked in. Look, this is an ambitious endeavor that could potentially amount to something good for college football as a whole and act as a counter to what some see, including me, as the ever-expanding dominance of the SEC over college football. But the scheduling that these 3 leagues envision would seem to be a ways off due to the existing and current and future commitments and a pair of tough-to-change broadcast agreements. Can you hear the SEC laughing, guys? I wish these 3 gents and the 41 schools the best of luck, but, I'm not betting the farm on it.
As well you shouldn't. But there is some plus to this, and I'll talk about that in a second. Anthony, I asked the same question I just asked Trey. College football will never be the same, right?
Yeah, if we're going to use comic book references, the ACC, the Big Ten, and the Pac-12 have come together to form the Justice League of America to basically stop the Legion of Doom that is the SEC conference, if you want to go that far. This is pretty much, and Jay mentioned it, even if they don't want to mention it, it's a reaction to the SEC. That's pretty much what it is. These 3 colleges saw the SEC gaining more and more power with the addition of Texas and Oklahoma. And to throw in a Game of Thrones reference, they band together to simply hold the door. That's all they were trying to do. They're trying to slow down the SEC's ability to somehow start cherry picking power big name teams and adding it to an already dominant conference. As far as
wait, Anthony, are you comparing the SEC to the White Walkers in the Army of the Dead? Nice.
Yeah. Have you seen their TV contracts as of late? Yeah, pretty much. You just mentioned it. They're locked in with ESPN long term. This is coming off a long term agreement from CBS, which is going back 2+ decades, if you want to go that far. But you look at it like this. The biggest thing is also the college football playoff, and we talked about the SEC adding these 2 big name teams, but also that's 2 teams that can take up 2 more spots as far as of a Hispanic college football playoff, and also the television rights. ESPN has the exclusive rights to the college football playoff. You may have some athletic directors and commissioners who may want to kind of open the market up a little bit, get a little bidding war started, get some more money out there. Maybe CBS would love to bring the college football playoff to national television. Maybe Fox, maybe ESPN throwing more money and make the entire college football playoff broadcast exclusive on ABC, which they haven't, which obviously it's not been the case as far as ESPN. They also talk about the bowls, if you want to go into consideration. The Rose Bowl has been kind of the thorn in the side of the college football playoff for scheduling, especially when the Rose Bowl is part of that rotation and having to schedule basically simply 2 games in itself. Okay, the Rose Bowl itself being part of the college football playoff and having to be played on New Year's Day has insisted. And also, you have the Rose Bowl game when it's separate in the years. It's not exactly part of the rotation. Being taken in a Big Ten team, which is, it's a big mess. So there's so much money getting thrown around, and these 3 conferences are pretty much trying to slow down the the power shift as far as going to the SEC, but also they're trying to kind of maintain the financial ramifications that everything is going to happen. But at the long story short, as far as long term, like Jay mentioned, it's a handshake agreement. We don't know exactly what's going to be locked in or how it's going to affect it long term because all the non-conference schedule games are pretty much scheduled for the next few years. So we don't know if there's going to be any changes. We don't know if we're going to see more cross-conference matchups. And also a big mention, the Big 12 is not part of this.
No,
we all kind of left that out in the last segment. The Big 12 did not have a seat at the table as far as this alliance goes.
And honestly, Anthony, I think that was due in large part to no one, because the future of the Big 12 at the time of the announcement was very much in doubt. No one knew which way the wind was going to blow. Were they going to scatter themselves, or were they going to, try and reconstitute? It'll be interesting to see down the line if the Big 12, once it's fully reconstituted with these 4 new teams, elects to, have the same handshake agreement with these other conferences. And 4 of the 5 Power 5 conferences aligned, against the SEC.
I think, Jay, by the way, sorry to cut you off there. I think you're going to see now the Big 12 maybe join this group in a second. I think Anthony, let me finish your point. I want to bring up 2 huge points before we move on to our final segment.
All right. Yeah, but one thing I would say too is when this agreement was made, the idea that the Big 12 would disband and these conferences would be allowed to kind of cherry pick what teams they wanted was, I'm quite sure it had to be on the table, but now with the Big 12 announcement trying to expand, maybe they do get a seat at the table or join, or because Rabbi's a wrestling fan and we're both going to SmackDown next weekend, they join the bloodline. And obviously, with the SEC being the head of that table, and the other 3 trying to kind of slow down that power surge, it's going to be interesting to see. College football has become a bigger story off the field in the last few months. Has been on it.
It's always been that way. By the way, I acknowledge Roman Reigns as my tribal chief. So 2 things that I want to bring up in here. Number 1. I actually think there is some juice to this squeeze, and I'm going to tell you why. Number 1, the alliance, so to speak, is not a fan of college football expansion because if you leave the number of teams in the pot to 4, if you keep it at 4, which I don't think any of us want, or if you even move it to 6 or 8, the possibility of an at-large SEC team gets smaller. So who would like the possibility to make sure that their ACC team, Pac-10 team, Pac-12 team, or Big 10 team is in there? Everybody else. So, and there have been rumors, I think West Virginia's AD said expansion is very much on life support now because of these moves. And eventually, the SEC teams that I'll even look at an example. Texas A&M had a very good year last year, but their 1 loss to Alabama was just not enough to get them in. They're going to get pissed off after a while that they're not being at a seat at that final playoff table. So,
they're pissed off. They're no longer the only Texas team in the SEC.
Yes, they're pissed off about that. So once you get pissed off teams, guess what? The SEC might break apart a little bit. That's number 1. Number 2, and the Big 12 has already mentioned ESPN by name. I don't know if you guys know this. I'm your media rights expert of this show. ESPN is basically taking over CBS's package in 2024. So CBS is kind of going to maybe get a little lower in the college football game, but ESPN is literally taking their hitch and tying their wagon to the SEC. And I think putting the pressure on ESPN to not monopolize the industry is key.
Yeah.
Because they would like the SEC to dominate themselves. I think if the Big 10 continues their tradition and has a good package with Fox, who's done a very good job broadcasting that sport, they can keep some ties to ESPN. So maybe a Big 10 game of the week has more cachet than your random Ole Miss, Mississippi State November Egg Bowl game. That's a key as well. I think you guys are right. It's a handshake deal. It's not as big of a deal as we think. However, you might be seeing the effects of this move as everything goes along. So it'll be very interesting to see, I hate to say it, college football as a business over the next 5 years.
Yeah.
Finally, it's Heisman time. Devontae Smith broke the QB mold of the award winning and in 2020, but Joe Burrow fit everything about that mold in 2019. What will 2021 bring? Place your bets, legally, of course, still not legal to gamble here in New York. Anthony, we start with you.
Well, before I get to Sam
Actually,
Howell,
wait a minute. Anthony, we start with you, but we're going to put a disclaimer on your picks.
yeah, before I get to the good and bad of Sam Howell, I gotta throw this out there. I mean, look, ESPN, you gotta find a way to pay Stephen A. Smith's contract at some point, right? So why not add more college football games and try to get more revenue from that? But there goes my Stephen A. Smith slate for the day. Okay, I'm jealous. I mean, he got a big contract. I would love to have that kind of money too. But getting to Sam Howell, the good and the bad, the good. Howell's career from North Carolina, his career trajectory has been going up. I mean, the last few years. Let's just be honest. Record center freshman year, 3,600 yards, 41 yards, 38 touchdowns. He improved his accuracy in year 2. His sophomore year, his completion percentage went to 68%, which is up to 61.4 in 2019. And honestly, the past season, he due for 200 yards and plus yards in every game, 3 or more touchdowns 6 times, only 1 multi-interception performance, and he led the ACC with 30 touchdown passes and was ranked 9th nationally in efficiency. And this is going into year 3 of Phil Longo's offense, which is only going to help. And he was just as impressive in the Orange Bowl against Texas A&M. And then Friday night happened. And Virginia, I don't know if you saw the link I sent you guys last night. Virginia Tech was rocking pregame. I mean, to see 50,000 sing along to Enter Sandman. I'm expecting Mariano Rivera to run out of that title at some point with the rest of the team. But the Hokies defense absolutely made Howell look pedestrian 24 hours ago. They sacked him 6 times. They held him to under 200 yards passing, intercepted him 3 times, and pulled the upset. 17-10 upset win over North Carolina. North Carolina is looked at as being one of the teams that could probably contend with Clemson as far as coming out of the ACC and maybe being in a conversation of being a college football playoff team. But it's not. They didn't get out to a great start last night, and we consider UNC doesn't actually play Clemson as part of their schedule. It's kind of another blow to the college football chances. But last night's performance, it's not. If Howell bounce back, has a great year, that'd be great. But I think this loss is and this performance is really going to be held against him a little bit as far as the conversation and being a finalist. Hear about this. North Carolina has not had, give me a second to pull this up. They have not had a Heisman Trophy finalist since 1948 and 1949. Charlie Choo Choo Justice finished second.
I remember
both
Charlie
years.
Choo Choo Justice.
Yeah. At this point, I felt old enough to have been around when he played. But it's been a long time since they even had a finalist. And I think this performance against Virginia Tech may actually keep him kind of out of that top 5 finalists window. But he should be able to rebound and have a great year. They're trying to replace 2 top weapons he lost from last season also, which didn't quite help. One of the other stuff she's do last night, which is just awful. I mean, he was wrapped up. It was the final 2 minutes of the game. They're trying to drive down the game time score. Got wrapped up by his ankles. Kind of went into a spinning movie and blindly trying to throw it out of bounds, threw it right to a Virginia Tech defender who was able to hold on to the interception and kind of pretty much seal the game. It's plays like that that you would think that he would have cut down on the mistakes from obviously going into his junior year, but not a great start to say the least. At the Sam Howell,
Now,
including Virginia Tech though.
Anthony, you are the person who's picked Derek King in the past, and he might be a better Heisman finalist if he has a good game today against Alabama than Howell.
Yeah, you know what's funny? You know what's funny? Because I picked them literally a couple of years ago to be a Heisman Trophy finalist, and he sat out the year and transferred from Houston to Miami. And last year, obviously, he was lost for the season with an injury. So I wanted to stay away from Derek King. Look,
good idea.
I hope the kid does. I hope the kid does well. I hope he has great success. But as far as this segment, I was like, I don't want to go away. I don't want to go that route again. I took the same route as Sam Howell, and Virginia Tech just kind of blew everything up, literally out of the gate. So we'll see what happens.
We will. Quarterback, we have a little bit of a quarterback bias in this segment, rightfully so. Jay, let's talk again about Spencer Rattler.
Yeah, you know,
come on, the Heisman Trophy outside last year, we always know the quarterbacks are sexy pick.
We understand that completely. Again, that's why we have the quarterback bias. It's understandable.
You know, with his past success at building Heisman Trophy candidate quarterbacks, with his passer-friendly, explosive offensive scheme, I'm talking about Lincoln Riley here, the head coach at Oklahoma. It's hard not to see Spencer Rattler as the latest in the line that started with Baker Mayfield, who won the award in 2017, continue with Kyler Murray, who won the award in 2018, and the latest, for most recent, being Jalen Hurts, who finished second in 2019 after he transferred from Alabama. You know, Mayfield and Murray were both overall number one draft picks coming out. You know, Rattler he's a redshirt sophomore coming off a 2020 season, his first as a starter, where he completed 67.5% of his passes for 3,031 yards, 28 TDs against 7 interceptions. He led the Sooners to the Big 12 conference title with a solid performance in the win over Iowa State in the title game, going 22 of 34 for 272 yards and 1 touchdown. He followed that with an even better performance in the win over a Florida team quarterbacked by Heisman finalist Kyle Trask. Rattler went 14 of 23 for 247 yards and 3 touchdowns, leading the Sooners to a 55-20 win in that bowl game. I believe it was the Peach Bowl, gents.
It was the Cotton Bowl.
Cotton Bowl, sorry, my bad. Right, it's the Big 12. And catapulted him into this year's Heisman conversation with a lot of media outlets listing him as the preseason favorite. Talk of him going number 1 in the next NFL draft has been much louder than a whisper, guys. His potential is a major reason Oklahoma comes into this season with their most legitimate national championship hype in years. Dane Brugler, who's the NFL draft guru for The Athletic, says that it's easy to get excited about Rattler and his natural talent. Brugler's scouting report goes on to say that Rattler delivers his passes with velocity, accuracy, and instincts, creating plays inside or outside of structure. Tracking his progress over last season, his trajectory says he will be a future first-round pick. The same scouting report, however, also says that Rattler still has work to do to get there. His decision-making must improve, and there are scouts who say he is not yet ready to be the CEO of an NFL franchise. The history of redshirt sophomore quarterbacks leaving early for the NFL draft has more busts than hits, but Rattler's development over this season will determine if he can be that early first-round pick or if he needs more work at the college level. Winning the Heisman will tell us a lot about that development. It starts today against Tulane, and, you know, with Lincoln Riley as his coach and playing in his offense, I wouldn't bet against him, guys.
Absolutely not. Lincoln Riley is, like I said, done as good of a job as Bob Stoops has done in Oklahoma. And that tree has really worked out really well for that place. Okay, so I was doing my research, and then I was watching ESPN, The Evil Empire. We mentioned that for many things this week. So Robert Griffin III, who apparently is now old enough to be an ESPN analyst, Matt Corral of Mississippi, his Heisman pick. And I was like, really? But I'm looking and I'm seeing it makes sense. He is the all preseason, all SEC quarterback selection. He is a redshirt junior. And he is playing, even though he won't be there Monday night because he just got COVID. Just announced he had COVID this morning. He's playing for Lane Kiffin in Ole Miss. And Lane Kiffin features the quarterback exclusively, then goes to the quarterback again on second down. He'll throw about 65 passes a game. And so you'll have the reps if you're Lane Kiffin. Corral threw for 3,337 yards and 29 touchdowns last year. Oh, and he threw in 500 yards and 4 touchdowns on the ground last year. Those are Tebow-esque numbers, to say the least, especially for a short season. He is exciting. He is a gunslinger. And again, that Ole Miss offense averages just 40 points per game. They give up 44 points per game usually, but we're really just talking about offense here. They Ole Miss won 4 out of their final 5 games in 2020. They beat number 7 Indiana in the Outback Bowl, so he's had big game experience under his belt. Corral is probably the best quarterback Lane Kiffin's had in a long time, so I think Kiffin's going to use into the right strengths. The schedule, obviously, I think I mentioned the fact that they play Oklahoma coming up in October. That's a huge game for Corral because he had a very good game against them last year, and an upset might prove a Johnny Manziel, if you want to hear a name from the past, because he beat Alabama and that led him to a Heisman Trophy. He has games against Louisville, Austin Peay, and Tulane off of the bat. Not the hardest schedule, although Louisville is going to be a close game. That's at a neutral site. Then comes Alabama on October 2nd, then LSU, then Auburn, then Texas A&M. He puts up good numbers in that game, especially with the conference that he's a part of. He might be on his way at least to New York, if they're doing that this year, unless it's still virtual. He can easily be a finalist, and who knows, he might take home the trophy. So says the gospel of the rabbi and RG3. That's it. We're done.
Yeah,
that's our show. As we start to see that beautiful pigskin fly around the college gridiron again, it's glorious, guys, isn't it? Yep. We'll see you on Monday night,
Labor Day,
Labor Day, for our NFL preview. Get excited. We'll have our friend Joe Tafaro back on. We'll do some trash talking. You know the deal. Jay will wear his Pittsburgh Steelers jersey, wear some Pittsburgh Steelers gear. Anthony will wear Giants gear. I will wear a blue shirt like I normally do. It's all good. We're back up and running, and that means content will be flying on our socials. Facebook.com/OnTheSportsLines Live, YouTube.com/OnTheSportsLines On Demand, ONTH Sportslines with that little @ symbol on Twitter for the link to each show that we post, and other various stuff. If we find a Jason Stark thing, we're posting it up there. Jay loves doing that.
Yeah. Anyway. And any other nice, articles I think y'all should read, because
I think we're going to do a lot. We're promising to do a lot more. It's one of the busiest times in the sports season from now until the end of the year. So enjoy everything. Guys, enjoy the kickoff of the college football season. We're glad we can join you this morning. Have a good rest of your Labor Day weekend.
See you Monday night.
Bye.